Okay, recording in progress. Okay, great. So thank you for doing this, Hilary. So I'm going to ask the first question here. What positions have you held in your career?
I actually started teaching elementary music in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. That was my first job. And it was extremely valuable to me as a choral conductor because I think it was at that point that I learned how to clarify musical elements to people who were, in their case, quite young, but many of those concepts I was able to use with amateur singers in community groups, in church groups, and so forth. So I started as an elementary specialist. I continued working with children when I was in the lab school during my doctoral program. And then my first university job in the States which was at University of North Carolina in Greensboro, had a lab school associated with that. So for 9 of 10 years I was there. I taught twice a week, and it was just the best thing. All of the method students came with me. After I was in North Carolina, I went to the Ohio State University for 17 years. That position was very choral oriented, conducting choirs, graduate students, and so forth. And then my last full-time position was at the University of Toronto, which is my alma mater. And so it was a great honor to go back there.
And you've also held positions in some of the big choral organizations.
Yes, I have done a lot of service work, which has been another form of good experience. I served in American Choral Directors Association as a state president and a region president, and eventually as national president. And then I've just finished a 1-year term as their interim executive director, which was well timed in the pandemic because I was getting a little bored. So I could not be bored and have that job at the same time.
I am sure. Although you're retired now, you're still very active on the North American choral scene as well
Yes.
as internationally. And what are some of the projects in which you've been involved since retiring, other than ACDA?
Well, actually, the first 2 years after I finished teaching in Toronto, that was 2018 to 2020, I still had some doctoral students. When I left the university, I assumed, as did everybody, that they would hire somebody for the fall of 2018, but it didn't work out. So I finished up with these students the first 2 years going back and forth to Toronto between Columbus, Ohio, where I live now. And then we did a lot online. And so the last of those finished in November of 2020. And I was also doing some small residencies at universities. I was on the Choral Journal editorial board until I started working as the interim executive director. Consulting lots of Zoom meetings, some on leadership and that kind of thing, just a bit of this and that, and some time as a nana to the 2 grandchildren who are 6 and 8. So I like that part of it too.
I'm sure. Through your articles and conferences, we can see that the role of women in choral conducting and women in leadership roles have been topics of special interest to you.
Mhm.
What led to this interest?
I never had a female teacher in conducting. I always had male teachers, but I had 2 very strong female music education advisors. One when I was an undergrad at the University of Toronto, and one as my doctoral music ed advisor. They were role models for me. They were very encouraging. And I naively did not think that my gender would hold me back. So every opportunity that came along, I took it. But I began to realize when I was a young faculty member in North Carolina that there were students, female identifying students, who saw me as a role model, in many cases because I had a family and I was working full time. And that seemed to be something that they wanted to know more about. Then I had a doctoral student at UNCG who asked if I would oversee her paper. She wanted to probe the issue of leadership styles among conductors. There had been work done in band and in orchestra, but not in choral conducting. And so once I got into that work with Gail Allen, I really began to sort of crystallize some of my own questions and began to look into it much more deeply. And she and I did some joint things together, and then we kind of went career-wise a little bit differently in our paths. And I ended up pursuing it a bit more than she did, partly because I had so many female graduate students that I advised. And so I just felt that it was important to try to be a voice for people, to, if there was anything I could do to smooth the path. I don't really think that leadership is gender oriented, but I discovered during my career that some people think it is. And I have some choice anecdotes that, as I'm sure you do too, comments that came from people about being a woman in the field. I just didn't feel it should hold me back or anybody else. So that has been one of the sort of driving forces behind my interest, is just my own personal experience.
The talks you give are addressed to everyone, obviously, not just women. Why is it important for both men and women to take interest in these topics?
I think that leadership is not gender connected in the sense that male identifying conductors have one style and female identifying conductors have another style. I think many of the characteristics, the musical skills, the professional skills, delivery, that kind of thing, pedagogy, understanding, I think that exists almost generically. There may be some differences in delivery, but over the course of my career, I really have not found them in abundance. And I think we all need to be able to work together to understand each other. There are men of my generation who do seem to have some, what I would consider to be archaic ideas. I think they need to understand when they're working with female identifying students, for example, some of those things just won't fly. They're not accurate. And so I always emphasize the kind of generic aspects of leadership. I think everybody needs to hear that, because we've got to be respectful. And it's not just gender, it's age, it's race, it's sexual identity, all kinds of things. We really need to try to be on an even playing field, I think. All right.
Great. Thank you.